It's a symbolic act. China is saying no more. We will not allow foreign merchants to poison our people. Lin Zexu writes a letter to Queen Victoria. It's formal, it's respectful, but it's devastating. He asks how Britain can morally justify selling a substance to China that is banned and controlled in Britain itself. He points out that British law recognizes opium as dangerous, that British doctors rarely prescribe it, that British society limits its use. So why, he asks, is Britain flooding China with it? Why is it acceptable to poison Chinese people but not British people? It's a reasonable question, a moral question, and the British response is to declare war, not because Lin Zexu broke any treaty. There was no treaty. China was fully within its rights to confiscate contraband, but because destroying that opium meant destroying British property. And more importantly, it threatened the entire economic model. If China could ban opium, if they could enforce that ban, the trade deficit would reverse again. Silver would stop flowing to Britain. The empire would go back to bleeding wealth. So Britain sends gunboats. The first Opium War. 16 British warships against a Chinese military that hasn't fought a naval war in decades. It's not a fair fight. British ships have superior firepower, better tactics, and steamship technology that lets them move regardless of wind. They destroy Chinese coastal defenses. They blockade ports. They force China to negotiate. And the treaty that ends the war, the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, is one of the most one-sided agreements in history. China has to pay Britain 21 million silver dollars for the destroyed opium and war costs. China has to open 5 ports to British trade, not just Canton. China has to cede Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity. China has to give British citizens extraterritoriality, meaning they're not subject to Chinese law, and nowhere in the treaty does it say opium is legal. But it doesn't have to, because by opening ports and granting British merchants free access, opium trade becomes impossible to stop. The floodgates are open. And the Sassoons, who backed Britain throughout the war, who provided ships and supplies and financial support, they're rewarded. They get first access to the new ports. They expand their operations, and the opium trade explodes from 50,000 chests in the 1840s to over 70,000 in the 1850s. More than 8 million pounds annually, China is being systematically drugged, and the Sassoons are at the center of it. But it gets worse, because China doesn't accept this. They try again. In the 1850s, Chinese officials attempt to enforce anti-opium laws in the treaty ports. They try to arrest dealers. They try to confiscate shipments, and Britain sees this as a violation of the treaty. So they do it again, the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. This time, France joins Britain. The French want their own trade concessions and see an opportunity. Together, British and French forces destroy Chinese defenses, march inland, and occupy Beijing. They burn the Old Summer Palace, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements in Chinese history, looting treasures and destroying irreplaceable art. It's cultural annihilation. And when China surrenders, the Treaty of Tientsin legalizes the opium trade explicitly. For the first time, opium is officially, legally allowed into China. The Sassoons don't have to hide anymore, don't have to bribe officials or smuggle shipments. It's legal, sanctioned, protected, and the family's wealth explodes. By the 1850s and 1860s, the Sassoons are operating the largest private merchant empire in Asia. They're not just shipping opium, they're moving into other commodities, cotton, tea, silk. They're opening banks. They're buying real estate, they're investing in railroads and telegraph lines. Every rupee they make from opium gets reinvested into something legitimate, and this is the key to understanding how drug money becomes respectable. You don't just hoard it, you invest it. You build infrastructure, you fund industries, you employ people, you make yourself indispensable to the economy. So that when someone questions where the money came from, you can point to the jobs you created, the buildings you funded, the services you provide. And suddenly, the drugs become a footnote. An uncomfortable detail that people politely ignore. Now here's where it gets darker. Because David Sassoon and his sons aren't just selling drugs, they're building legitimacy. They're donating to charities, they're funding schools and hospitals in Bombay, they're building libraries and synagogues. David Sassoon becomes a household name, not for opium, but for philanthropy. In 1847, he funds the David Sassoon Library and Reading Room in Bombay, still standing today. In 1861, he donates money for the Sassoon Dock, which becomes one of Bombay's most important commercial ports. He funds schools for Jewish children. He funds hospitals. He funds orphanages. And the Indian population looks at the Sassoon name on all these institutions and thinks, what generous people, what pillars of the community. Nobody's asking where the money came from. Or if they are, they're not asking loudly, because the British are protecting the Sassoons, elevating them, giving them honors.